and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast they could not stop, Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. I'm Waldemar Janustak, art critic of the Sunday Times here in London, and joining me as ever on this raft of revelation is a man who's both Scotland's most illustrious art historian and an illustrious Scottish farmer, Bendy. So you combine the pen and the pitchfork, right? That must be difficult. How do you manage?
It's very difficult, Weld. Farming this year has been a terrible washout. But you say I'm Scotland's most illustrious art historian. There's very few art historians in Scotland, so, it's great to be a big fish in a small pond.
Well, you are certainly that. I should quickly apologise for the fact that we're a day late on the poddy this week. I'm afraid that's because of me. I've been away in Poland filming exciting things. So that I was out of reach, out of touch, far away in distant Poland. But I had a great time, and hopefully you'll be hearing about that pretty soon. Anyway, Bendy, back to the farm, right? The thing about farms, right, is that you have rats on them, don't you?
Oh, no.
Now, I know that rats are a deep phobia of yours. I mean, you're really frightened by them, aren't you? I mean, really frightened.
Yeah, properly frightened.
You are properly frightened. So I thought in this podcast, it's generous and ongoing quest to help you with your rat phobia, that we'd let art work its magic on you by showing you some of the best rats in art. Because art, after all, it's an anagram of rat, right? And the master of the rat in art, Bendy, is the Japanese genius Katsushika Hokusai. He did the famous views of Mount Fuji and that great wave at Kanazawa, but he also did rats. Lots and lots of rats. Like this one here.
Oh, that's a nasty rat. Look at his
this
tail.
This
that's
biggie here.
Tail.
What do you think of that, this biggie here?
I don't like it. It looks like you're riding it there, so you're obviously much more comfortable with this genre than I am. Thanks, Wild.
Listen, you're misreading it, right? So it's a giant rat by Hokusai, and the chap riding the rat is not me, although he does indeed bear something of a resemblance with his big fat bottom sticking out. Now, that's actually Daikoku, who is the Japanese or Shinto god of good fortune, and particularly of farmers. So farming good fortune, Daikotsu, is the god who will bring it to you. And his companion, the messenger he uses most often to send out his good news, is the rat. Because rats were thought to be, in Japan at least, great symbols of good fortune and good luck. So we've got more images because basically Hokusai specialised in rats. No, you have to look at these. They're all going to nourish you and make you think differently about the poor old rat.
You're like Richard Burton and William Hurt in the film 1984. It's just, in
It's
room
nothing
101.
like that at all.
Stop this.
This is art having an attempt at trying to make you feel better, right? So here's another one. This is again Daikotsu, the god of the farmer, and he's riding this rat looks a bit angrier, I think. But still, a rat that's a messenger of good times. And the reason why rats became this symbol, really, of good fortune is, first of all, because of their fertility. Right, the rats could breed like rats, and in times of poverty, they still maintained this fertile population, so that was a good thing. But also, they were seen to be industrious, and they had a great ability to find food at times when other people couldn't, basically. So in times of famine, when there wasn't much food around, rats could always find food. So Taya, if we could spring up another image of the rats by Hokusai. There we have it. We have the rats eating bales of rice. Bales of rice, another great attribute of Daikoku, the god of farmers. Wherever there were bales of rice, the rats would come, these messengers of good fortune. So basically, Bendy, as you can see, in Japanese culture, the rat is a creature of good luck, good fortune, and well-being. So you really, really do need to take them to heart in a different way. But basically, the bigger the rat, the more luck it brings. What do you think of that?
No, not buying it. Fine if they like rats in Japan, but not here in my little corner of Scotland. My house is guarded by our two fearsome cats, Belle and Sebastian. So they're keeping the rats away from me. And enough of this ratty talk, Wild. I'm going to find out from Taya what your most loathed animal is and somehow plot my revenge on you. But I'm looking in our show notes here, and I see we're supposed to be discussing Turner and Constable and Caravaggio and all things nice. So let's move on from this fiendish smuggling in of yours of all these horrible rats.
Bendy, we are going to talk about Turner and Constable, indeed, because there's a huge show that's opened in London, and because people are always arguing about who's better, Turner or Constable. So I think we should continue that argument here on this podcast. And we're also going to be talking about an absolutely sensational Caravaggio that's turned up in exhibition in London. Extraordinary picture. I'm going to be talking to the curator, the director of the museum that's put it on, about that picture. First of all, Bendy, we need to do something that we promised a couple of weeks ago, which is to go back to your world. Your world is because you're not just a farmer, you're not just an art historian, you also know an awful lot about the art market. And in your world, there's some exciting things that have been happening recently. And you and I set out to try and imagine what kind of prices various things are going to reach, if listeners may remember. So shall we just go to the next section and see who was right and who was wrong in that one?
Okay, let's do that.
It's shocking news from the art world. Okay, Bendy, so shocking news from the art world. While I was away in Poland making my film about the forgotten wonders of Poland, you were here watching the art market unfold, and we saw some things, didn't we, that we were going to try and put some prices to. Talk me through it again and tell me how badly I did when it came to predicting what things were going to go for.
Well, in our little preview of the London Old Master Sales, which there's two major events every year in London, July and December Old Master Sales, we previewed some of the lots that were coming up this week, and we made little predictions about what they would make. I actually went down to the sales, so I had a great time while you were filming in Poland. I was scurrying around looking at hundreds and hundreds of old master paintings. It's the sort of thing I love doing. I even tried to bid on one, but as you'll hear, unsuccessfully. I think the star lot of the week was, do you remember while we discussed the triptych, which was being sold by an almshouse in Sherborne? This was a Flemish late 15th century triptych that apparently had been in this almshouse ever since the picture came to England. It had survived the Reformation, and it was sort of recently discovered.
Yeah, I loved it. You sent me a picture of it. I didn't see it in the flesh, but my, what an amazing image. And I love the fact that the artist is now known as the master of the Sherborne Almshouse. That's a great name for an artist.
Yeah, it was a lovely thing to see. It's big, it's in beautiful condition, and it was quite an exciting discovery. The estimate was a £2 to £3 million world, and you predicted that it would make £5.5 million.
Yeah, I thought it would go up because it was so impressive, and it was in such good condition, and there was a buzz about it, wasn't there? That you just felt people were really interested. So yeah, I've gone way above the estimate. So I went 5.5 million. Go on, tell me what happened.
And I predicted it would make 4.75 million. Well, it actually made 5.6 million pounds. So you were more or less exactly right. How about that?
Yeah, you see, because I'm not an art dealer and I know nothing about this world, I leave things to chance. I just let my instincts work on this. But I'm not surprised. It was a fantastic picture. And boy, oh boy, that central image of the raising of Lazarus, so interesting. So, that's great news that I whopped you on that one. Very exciting.
Yeah, well, I think actually you were just telegraphing to Taya and I what your actual bid was going to be on the night. So I'm sorry to hear you lost by only £100,000. Bad luck, well, but good effort.
Oh dear, you and your money bag talk. Oh well, off you go. What's the next one?
Another highlight was a newly discovered late Rembrandt, which was also at Sotheby's. This was quite a fine picture, I thought. There's so much discussion these days about what is and is not a Rembrandt, and I was expecting, when I went to the auction house, for there to be a little bit more sort of debate and discussion about it, but actually everyone just looked at the picture and went, yes, that's by Rembrandt, because it was so obviously by Rembrandt. So nice discovery by them. This, Wild, you predicted that this would make £4.5 million.
What was the estimate again? I forgot. It was
the estimate was £2 to £3 million.
Okay, so a bit higher than the estimate. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so you predicted it would go slightly above that at £4.5 million. I predicted, Wild, that it would make £6.5 million. And I'm delighted to say that on this one, Wild, I was the winner because it actually made £6.75 million. So you were good on the Flemish triptych, and I was good on the Rembrandt.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of surprised. I mean, I liked it, and obviously I didn't have any doubts about the authenticity of it. I thought it was a fairly ordinary late Rembrandt, as late Rembrandts go. But anyway, I'm pleased it fetched the money. I'm glad that you won that one. So it's 1-1. Go on.
a good trophy name these days. That's what good trophy pictures make. Now, the other picture we were discussing, Wild, was a very large Artemisia gentileschi, which was at Christie's, another new discovery. And this was a picture of a woman presenting her child to St. Blaise. The estimate was £400,000 to £600,000. You, Wild, came up with a sweepstake prediction that it would make £1.1 million. I was a little bit less confident than you, and I went for £850,000. Wild, we were both wrong because it didn't sell.
Oh, God. Really?
Yeah.
That's a surprise. I actually thought you were going to say, oh, Wald, you were right because it went for far more than the estimate. I mean, everybody talks about Artemisia all the time these days, don't they? I mean, she's such a big name on art historical lips. I'm surprised by that because it was an exciting picture. Of course, it wasn't one of those very personal Artemisia as a champion of womanhood sort of pictures. It was her other style, wasn't it, where she becomes slightly interchangeable with other Baroque artists of the moment. So I guess that would have been it. But I'm surprised, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I was surprised. I thought it would sell quite well, actually, because, as you say, Artemisia is hot to trot these days. But there were no takers on the night. So sometimes that just happens at auction. You know, it's a terrible way, really, to try and sell art. You just expose things to the market for about a minute, one random day in the year, and sometimes it just doesn't work for you. Well, probably the final one we should alight on was, do you remember we discussed what I thought was quite a nice and historically important life portrait of Admiral Horatio Nelson.
Oh, yes, without the eye patch. I remember it well.
Without an arm and without an eye patch, yeah. And this was being sold at Christie's. The estimate for this painting by Lemuel Francis Abbott, which was a life portrait, a very rare life portrait, because most portraits of him are done posthumously. The estimate for this was £200,000 to £300,000. While you thought it would make £280,000, I got a little bit carried away, and I thought it would make £750,000. Well, kind of neither of us are right. It actually made £419,000, so in between. How about that?
Yeah, but closer to me than to you.
I'm heading towards a score draw here, and I think that's the narrative I would like to push.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll give you that. But I'm surprised. I mean, to be honest, I don't know the artist. I mean, it's more your world. You're the writer of The Invention of British Art. So you know about these kind of moments in art. I didn't know the artist. I took you on your word when you said it was the first version of the painting, and also that it was the life portrait of Nelson while he was alive, which was rare. So I just thought, given there's a trend in buying at the moment, isn't there, of a kind of nationalism, you just feel that countries are buying up things that have a particularly direct relationship to their own history, and that somebody would dig deep into their pockets to get this. But I just took that on your word, really. So although it's a score draw, I got nearer than you did. I'm not feeling too bad about that. Can I ask you one thing? Do you remember we talked about a Bellotto that was coming up as well? Do you remember the Bellotto? Fabulous view of Venice. Now, I really like this painting. First of all, because I absolutely adore Bellotto. One of the reasons I went to Poland, was to see some more Bellottos, because in Poland, I don't know if you know this story, but in Poland, after Warsaw was basically razed to the ground by the Germans during the Second World War, it was later rebuilt almost brick by brick in the style of 18th century Poland, in 18th century Warsaw. And all the art that had helped them was by Bellotto, because Bellotto had been to Warsaw, he'd painted it over and over and over again. And so these wonderful views of the old town in Warsaw provided the template for the recreation of Warsaw after the war. So it's fantastic combination of events, the great art by Bellotto, who incidentally is always called Canaletto in Poland. So you go to the Canaletto room in the castle, not the Bellotto room. But anyway, Bellotto's views of Warsaw were the template for the recreation of the entire old town of Warsaw after the Second World War. So I thought that was amazing. Anyway, I thought Bellotto would go for a bomb because he's a brilliant painter, probably a better painter than his uncle Canaletto, and this is a classic view of Venice, and actually his views of Venice are quite rare, aren't they? Much more common are the views of Poland and Germany. So go on, take me out of my misery. What did it go for?
Well, you shouldn't have brought this one up, I think, because it's a loss for you. The estimate was £1 to £2 million. You thought it would make £3.2 million, and it just scraped in at £1.2 million with premium. So I think it made only 1 million hammer. But as you say, a very fine picture. I think I agree with you, heretical though it is, that actually Bellotto was a better painter than his uncle Canaletto. Do you know, I always get really confused when I go to a European museum. And as you say, they call Bellotto Canaletto. So it always takes me a while to work out which Canaletto I'm supposed to be looking at.
Well, stylistically, they are very different. Bellotto is a much more tangible painter, I think, much less stylized, uses fewer tricks. But if you go to Warsaw, which I'd love to take you there one day. If you and I go to Warsaw, we'll go to the Canaletto / Bellotto room, and you'll see what a miracle it is that his fabulous views of the old town were then rebuilt and provided this gorgeous template for the new Warsaw. But that's something to do in the future.
One final thing on the Lord Nelson story is that Sotheby's happened to be selling one of Lemuel Francis Abbott's later versions of his portrait of Lord Nelson, and that only made £25,000. So it's just interesting to see how the market affords a premium to the apparent life sitting. You know, what you're paying for is not so much the portrait or the artist, but that kind of more tangible connection to such an amazingly important historical sitter like Lord Nelson.
Yeah, I guess if it's the first image, that always means something. It also just shows you how flaky the art market is, doesn't it? I mean, it really just goes one way and the other. It seems like it's in the lap of the gods as to what the price is going to be. I'm glad that it's your world and not mine. I prefer the more secure world of art criticism. Speaking of which, by the way, Bendy, I have just seen an extraordinary picture that's gone on show in London, and a really exciting show, a little exhibition at the Wallace Collection. You know the Wallace Collection, of course. It's that beautiful little museum in just north of Oxford Circus. I'm sure you go there a lot, don't you?
Yes, love the Wallace Collection. When I do my annual Royal Academy course teaching connoisseurship, we always go to the Wallace Collection because it's got so many wonderful things to see, and in relatively quiet surroundings. In terms of the amount of masterpieces there are, it's often quite less well attended than a place like the National Gallery.
So all our foreign listeners, whose numbers and ranks seem to be growing and growing and growing, judging by the reactions we're getting particularly on the YouTube channel. I mean, there's people listening to us in El Paso, there's people all over the wilds of Canada. I think we're up to 8 listeners now from Ohio. I mean, we are hot in Ohio, let me tell you. So all that's good news. But those foreign listeners, they should get along to the Wallace Collection, because right now there's an extraordinary show on, and it's based on a single painting by Caravaggio
called Cupid Victorious.
The Interview. So, Bender, I talked to the director of the Wallace Collection, Xavier Bray, about this show, which I thought was an extraordinarily brave thing to do, because above all, it's a Caravaggio painting. It's one of his most startling images, I think. It has a fabulously interesting history. But to put it on show and just basically have one picture, and that's the exhibition, I thought that was a really brave thing to do by Xavier Bray. So here we go. Here's what he said to me.
Xavier, it's a brave idea to devote a show like this to just one picture. What made you do it?
It's the fact that as a picture it has a lot of wall power. The moment you come across it, you can't but go towards it. And we felt we really wanted to give as much space around it, but also to be able to light it, to give it the theatricality that originally was given. Apparently it hung in this great gallery of paintings, but it was hidden behind a green curtain. And then it would only be revealed by the curator, who would pull the curtain open, and suddenly you'd see it.
So what's the story of this picture? How did it come to be made?
The story is fascinating. It was very much the product of a close friendship and mutual respect between Vincenzo Giustiniani and Caravaggio. Giustiniani was an amazing collector. He's a banker, but collected, a man of letters, loved music. And Vincenzo was obsessed by Caravaggio. Any picture that would appear on the market, he would snap up. But he hadn't yet actually commissioned one. And this is the first commission that Giustiniani is able to work on with Caravaggio.
Let's describe it for our listeners here. So what have we got? We've got a naked young boy, and he's Cupid, isn't he? And he's holding some arrows, and he's surrounded by various bits and pieces. But what are we looking at?
We are seeing a young boy completely naked. He's a sort of teenage boy, probably 12, 13. A very beautiful body, a body that looks more like a sort of athlete's body. And some people question whether the body actually belongs to the head. And there is that sort of strange sort of contrast between this very youthful, cheeky-looking young boy with a body that is possibly a bit more athletic, a bit more of an adolescent's body. So there's a bit of cut and paste going on, which is unsettling, I would say. And he's looking at you with this sort of very cheeky smile. There's a sort of ruddiness in the face, very messy hair, and that smile, he's all-knowing.
Yeah, it's a scamp's face, isn't it?
It is a street urchin.
It's a kid who'd steal your watch in the street.
There's a bit of that, and I have to admit, the picture is shocking in many ways, but the thing that really shocked me was the dirty toenails. The foot really got me. It actually almost made me a bit, not sick, but a bit uneasy about
He
it.
has got dirty feet. Of course, Caravaggio was famous for using real models. I mean, the myth is that you go out to the markets and just find people and bring them in the studio. But this tangibility that you have of this young boy, the sense of him being someone real, I mean, that is just unavoidable, isn't it? The feeling we have for that.
And I guess, for Cupid, I mean, he's the god of love, the son of Venus, a goddess of love, the son of Mars, a god of war. Here, normally he's slightly idealized, slightly effeminate. Suddenly here you have a real boy who's posing as Cupid. And it's unsettling, but at the same time, it brings home the story, the concept of this boy who's able to, shooting an arrow into you or somebody else, make people fall in love with each other. He's got a lot of power.
So Cupid's power is that he makes you fall in love. So here he is with his clipped-on wings on the back, a bit unlikely looking because they're so realistically painted. And the meaning of the picture, really, judging by its title, Love Conquers All, is that love is such a powerful force that it can get to everything. And representing all the things that can be conquered by love is the stuff at the bottom of the picture, isn't it?
And it's a brilliant concept because it's basically a picture in two halves. You've got this beautiful young boy looking out at you and laughing at you, but what he's just done, he's just walked into this room and literally just swept everything off a tabletop onto the ground. All the things that we are so sort of proud of, the great sort of human achievements of music, of architecture, of the arts of war, of literature, of power, all of that completely pushed aside.
And these are all indicated by the still lifes. So you've got a couple of musical instruments.
That's right, you've got a lute, you've got a violin, you've even got a musical score underneath it. For music, you've got a set square and a compass for architecture. You've got a book with beautiful writing and a quill and a laurel, the sort of crowning of the poet laureate at the side. You've got this fantastic piece of armour, a breastplate with the tassets and the light reflecting off it is just sensational. And then very detailed, you almost miss, is the crown and the sceptre in the top right corner, which you've got this amazing sort of gold shellac on it. And that's temporal power.
So what we're looking at here is a picture in which these fantastic and important forces, music, building, architecture, the army, war, the ability to fight, and royal power as well through the crown, all these seemingly important and potent forces, they're all being challenged by love. So the message here is love can destroy anything, isn't it? However important you are, whoever you are, however good the things you're doing, if Cupid pops up in your room and fires his arrows at you,
you're lost.
You're done for.
Yeah,
lost.
You sort of give up. And what's wonderful, and he does it in a very subtle way, and you only notice it towards the end of your sort of moment of checking this picture out, is the fact that he's also sitting on an orb, on a universal globe where you can see the stars. So he is universal. He's not just the street urchin who's posing as Cupid. He's also representative of love on a sort of universal scale, which is very powerful. He could resolve all the political and wars that we are undergoing at this very moment. He's got that power.
All he'd have to do is put his arrows away and never fire them at anybody. But I love the fact that this all-powerful figure, love can conquer all, is such a scamp, because what it implies, that look on his face, that cheekiness of his pose, what it implies is a kind of destructiveness to Cupid. He can go anywhere he wants and do anything he wants in ways that they're really impish, aren't they?
Yeah. But there is a subtle undertone, and I still have yet to understand it, but the fact that the bow is actually not strung, so he's not actually ready to shoot any arrows. And there's one thing that's missing in the still life, which normally gets represented in these themes of Cupid victorious, and that's the fact that there is no palette or brush. The painter is not present in the arts, has been thrown aside. And that's because Caravaggio has painted it. And in a way, Cupid is also painting. The painting is just as victorious as Cupid is, if you see what I mean. And so I think there's a conceit going there, which verges on the arrogance.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is that love can conquer music, it can conquer poetry, it can conquer architecture, but it can't conquer painting, because this is a painting as well.
Yeah, it's a subtle one, but it's the arrogance and genius of Caravaggio, which perhaps comes through in that way.
Well, let's talk about the genius of Caravaggio, because when you walk into this room, what absolutely astonishes you is the sense of reality, isn't it? I mean, this body, slightly spooky, adolescent body, totally nude in a way that is, I mean, even today, quite shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the picture did shock. I think it was seen as earthly love, a sort of rather lustful love by some, rather than being an allegory of pure love. The gossip was that the boy posing for him was actually somebody called Francesco, or the diminutive is Cecco, that was actually an apprentice, a studio assistant to Caravaggio. He does reappear in other pictures by Caravaggio, so the model is definitely, did exist, whether it is Cecco. And then there are, the studio gossip is that it is the boy who laid with Caravaggio. Now, again, this is a big question mark there, but it's possible.
It's the big discussion about Caravaggio's sexuality.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll never really know. I mean, I think the most we can say with any certainty is that it was complex.
Very complex. He enjoyed courtesans. He sometimes might have even been a pimp himself. I think he was definitely involved in all kinds of activities.
Yeah, what you always do feel with him is that it is an insider's view, isn't it?
Yeah,
this is not someone looking at somebody else who thinks it might be like that. His superpower is realism, isn't it? That's what really makes him different, that sense that these things absolutely appear to be happening in front of your nose.
It is, but it's controlled, edited realism. So it's not photographic realism or camera realism. It's realism that is beautifully edited. So something that comes across in this picture is that everything's in flux. You're not quite sure, you can't pin everything down. So for example, the instruments, they're not instruments you could actually play and pick up. They're some of missing strings. If you look at the lute, the floret or the rosette in the middle hasn't been carved out, so it can't actually emit any sound. And yet, there's some aspects of this picture that are not quite tangible. They're not real in the way you would expect them to be real. So the realism is a sort of cleverly edited, enhanced realism.
So he uses realism in the way that other artists might use grace or some kind of formal invention.
I think so.
As a weapon.
Yeah, and it brings out a sort of poetry in his realism. So it's not a realism that, yes, it is shocking on the one level, but at the same time it's extraordinarily poetic and elegant and sophisticated.
Well, no, the show seems to be doing well. It was busy when we came in earlier.
We're getting
What
about
are
1,000 visitors.
What are people saying about it?
Listen, the thing I most enjoy about this is seeing, first of all, a crowd of about 20 people in front of it at any given time. People who don't know each other. It's slightly dark here, so they look like Caravaggio's himself, and literally talking to each other, asking questions and trying to understand the picture. They can't quite get it. Some people have visceral dislike of the picture, they just can't bear it. Others are completely intrigued by it, and they try and understand. They dissect it, they almost analyze it, and luckily we've introduced sort of, didactic panels, but they're all on the side, so they're not part of the main show. If you want to know a bit more, then you go and check it out, come back with the information and start deciphering the picture for yourself. But it's one of these pictures that takes time, and the beauty is that this show is free, so you can come back whenever you want until the 12th of April, and that's sheer luxury for me, to come and see a Caravaggio, like the chapels you see in Rome. You just walk in, enjoy the Caravaggio and walk out, have a cappuccino, and then come back again later. But that's for me is the sheer beauty of this show.
Marvellous. I've got to pick you up on one thing. I was looking through what you've got planned for next year. Xavier Bray, are you putting on a show of Winston Churchill's paintings? Tell me it isn't true.
It is true, I'm afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm very proud to say that the Waldy's collection will be showing Winston Churchill for the first time on the national stage. It is time that he got his moment as a great painter in his own right.
So we're going to be facing up to the fact that Winston Churchill was a great artist.
You'll be surprised by that he could have made a living as an artist. Great, you can decide. But definitely, he exhibited under the pseudonym of David Winter at the RA. So he managed to get into the summer exhibitions purely on his own merit.
Yeah, and I've got into the summer exhibition.
Have you?
I look forward to it. It's going to be an interesting year.
We could have a discussion there. I look forward to the debate.
There you go, Bendy. I mean, amazing picture, don't you think?
Yeah, amazing picture. And before I get into the picture, I just want to say actually what an admirer I am of Xavier Bray. And you say he's very brave in putting that one picture show on. And it's worth just to make sure listeners know that before Xavier became director of the Wallace Collection, do you remember they had that rule which had been in place for, I think ever since it came into existence, that no painting could ever leave the collection, not even on loan, and nothing could come in. And he managed to change that, and he overcame a lot of opposition to change that. And it means that every now and then the Wallace Collection does lend a painting to an exhibition somewhere internationally, and that occasionally he can smuggle a great masterpiece like this picture into the Wallace Collection. So I think it's a win-win.
It is, absolutely. No, he's a fabulous guy. Really interesting, really fun. And inventive. He's an inventive museum director. Heaven knows there aren't enough of those about. I mean, he just creates unlikely shows. I mean, this Winston Churchill show that he's got coming up, I mean, it just made me laugh when I heard about it. It's going to be ridiculous, isn't it, Bendy?
Well, you were saying earlier on about nationalism creeping into these things, and we're now so desperate in little old London to get people through the door that sometimes we have to resort to these kind of exhibitions. But, I think Churchill was quite an interesting painter. As you say, not a great painter, but historically significant one. So I look forward to seeing that show.
Well, I'll see you there. I'm going to go along. At the very least, I'm going to get a good laugh out of it, I think. But talking still yet more about nationalism and artists that we love, particularly here in Britain. Let's get on to the real contest here. This is the top of the bill of this particular podcast, because we are going to go and visit an exhibition that's opened in London that's been an extraordinarily impactful show. It's about two of the greatest British artists, and you and I are going to come to some big decisions about it, because we've reached that moment where Waldy goes up against Bendy.
Waldy versus Bendy.
There you go, Bendy. It's you and me. Fistcuffs at dawn. We're going to visit the Turner Constable exhibition at Tate Britain, and we're going to try and come to some big conclusions about it. Now, first of all, you've seen the show. Did you like it?
I have seen the show. I absolutely loved it. We so infrequently nowadays actually get exhibitions which are just a great display of great works by our greatest artists. And we can disagree later on perhaps about who came out on top or whether the interpretation of the pictures was right, but just as a feast for the eye, I absolutely loved it. In fact, I went through a few times. It was that brilliant.
Yeah, it's very well curated, isn't it? It's split up into these helpful and interesting sections. I mean, I must admit, I don't usually like what curators do, because they quite often try and interject their own personalities too forcefully into the display. But that hasn't happened here. They've just organised the material, haven't they, in a helpful and inventive way.
Yeah, the display had a good rhythm to it. And actually to fill all those rooms downstairs with so many masterpieces was quite a curatorial achievement. And also a shout out to the registrars and all the art handlers and everyone else who's involved in bringing in so many important pictures.
So let's go through it now. Above all, let's try and see what the exhibition is telling us about each of these artists. So they're very different, aren't they? Turner and Constable, in terms of their backgrounds, what they came from, and indeed in the sort of talent they had. So the exhibition starts off with two portraits, one of Constable, one of Turner, and they are immediately, I think, tangibly different types of artists. And even their portraits seem to me to be very different. Constable's the rich, almost mini Suffolk lord, isn't he, sitting there rather casually looking a bit like Poldark, whereas Turner's more intense, full on, face staring at you. They've got different personalities, different backgrounds. They're a different kind of artist, just at their very basic level, aren't they?
They are, sort of, although I have to say, perhaps the exhibition's as guilty of this as everyone else in art history. I think the different background stuff between them is massively overdone. I mean, Constable, and you've just done it yourself, is always presented as this kind of almost like the son of a duke, because his dad happened to own a mill and a few fields in Suffolk. So,
and they had loads of money, and they lived like country squires.
They weren't that rich, and he had his own struggles in life.
Well, they weren't as rich as you, Bendy, but I mean, they were comparative. Well, not even comparative. They were very well off. He had a luxurious art beginning, didn't he?
Well, I think that's actually, for me, the more interesting thing about room number one in that exhibition. You see the difference in their art beginnings, actually not in the portraits of Turner and Constable, but in the two side-by-side pictures which they painted for their Royal Academy diploma pieces. Turner's picture for the Royal Academy is one of his early works, because he was straight into the Royal Academy at the tender age of 26, and he remains the youngest one they ever accepted. Poor old Constable, his diploma picture is a much later work, a version of The Lock. And this is because he didn't get to become a member of the Academy till he was 56. So they had actually, despite we're told they're such different and privileged upbringings, quite a different route into art acceptance and being formally accepted by the Royal Academy. And I think that's something which really unfolded quite beautifully in the exhibition.
I don't think that means anything, and I'll tell you why. Because the reason why Turner was accepted much more quickly and that it took Constable so long is quite simply the fact that Turner was a prodigy. I mean, if you look at the things they've got on show here, I mean, there's a watercolour that he did, a self-portrait, when he was, 13 or 14 or something. It's extraordinary. And these first early watercolours of landscapes, beautiful views of rivers and mountains. A teenager is doing these, and his talent was of that kind that is immediately obvious and immediately enviable. Now, they compare that with early Constable, who frankly takes much, much longer to get anything like as good as Turner. So, if you're trying to be very British about this and very fair, you'll say things like that, it took them a long time to be accepted by the Royal Academy. But the evidence, to my eyes, of the difference in their talents is just there on the walls. As a teenager, Turner was already prodigiously talented. I mean, a great painter very early on. And Constable took far, far, far longer. So it sort of depends on what your view of art is, really. I mean, do you rate real talent and prodigious talent? Do you prefer it to learning how to get there eventually, or don't you?
Yeah, nice try. I look at those Constables, those early sketches and those early drawings and watercolors, and I think he's just as prodigious. Okay, I would probably have to concede that in the natural talent stakes, in the natural prodigy stakes, Turner might come out on top. But seriously, I think the important point to understand as to why Turner was accepted by the Royal Academy so early is because he was successful in, if you like, masking his prodigiousness. So if you look at the pictures that you're saying are evidence of Turner's brilliance when he's younger, are the more sort of private ones, his sketchbooks and studies. The pictures that he paints to get accepted by the Royal Academy are the kind of Claudian pastiches where he has to, for some decades, actually suppress his natural talents. And this is something that Ruskin picks up on. It's not just my observation. Ruskin says it takes Turner 30 years to escape from the shadow of the Royal Academy. So this is this desire amongst what I call the commissioning classes, the aristocracy, the elite in London in the later 18th century and early 19th century, not for pictures of the British landscape, the sort of thing that you and I love and the people going around the Tate Show will love, but actually for landscapes that looked like another place, that looked like sort of the rolling warm hills around Tuscany and Rome. And Turner was really good at doing that. And that's what I think you see in the Tate Show. The early rooms of Turner's early work. It takes you a long time to get to late Turner, the brilliance, the kind of pictures we like the Fighting Temeraire, rain, steam and speed.
Which aren't in the show, by the way, which is a shame, I thought, actually, but, interjecting quickly. Yeah. A lot of other things are, though. Yeah, go on, yeah.
Yeah, you see a lot of paintings where Turner feels uncomfortably as if he's masking what he really wants to paint. And Constable, of course, the reason I think Constable is so sort of subtle and yet powerful at the same time is he just decides he's not going to play that game. He wants to stay in Suffolk, learn to draw and paint the landscape that inspired him so much. And he says early on in 1802, there's a fantastic letter to his friend John Dunthorne, where he lays out his kind of artistic manifesto, and he says, I'm fed up with always having to paint pictures of somewhere else and to mimic the style of other artists. So the collectors, for example, wanted paintings that looked like Claude Lorraine's and so on and so forth. Constable says, I'm just not going to bother with that. To hell with the RA, I'm going to develop my own style. And that's why I think actually Constable is the first one of the two artists to actually really invent and bring something totally original to the story of British art, which is actually just painting the British landscape in a way that it hadn't been done before.
Yeah, but the reason he did that, and this is where the prodigy comes in again, is he couldn't do it any other way. I don't think early Constable could have painted like Claude. He hasn't got that kind of imaginative breadth of being able to look at all the art that's being made at the times and really be able to respond to it in a personal way. Now, I agree with you that some of Turner's attempts to paint Claude-like pictures are a bit clunky, and the fact that he had to work the market, that's just because he was a working class lad, completely different from the privileged Constable who was being paid for by his rich dad to paint slowly and paint whatever he wanted. Turner had to live in the marketplace, so he worked for various architectural draftsmen doing drawings for them. He had to make art that would sell. He had to, roll up his sleeves and work at it. And sometimes that led him to do things that aren't as impressive. I'll agree with you there. But on the other hand, at exactly the same time, if you look what he's doing with his watercolours, which he'd basically mastered by himself, they're absolutely stunning, the watercolours in this show. I mean, you've never seen watercolour being used like that, so atmospherically. In terms of evoking, for example, the drama of a seascape or the beauty of a sunset, I mean, God knows, there's nothing harder in art to paint than a sunset, is there? I mean, we all love them. We all go crazy when we see a beautiful sunset. Every time we go on holiday, we sit there looking at the sky going, oh, isn't that a gorgeous sunset? But so many artists have tackled it and failed, frankly, to capture that amazing atmosphere of the sunset. Turner, in his watercolours, just out of his teens, was already doing it. I mean, amazingly impressive, those early watercolours. And the other thing is, okay, Constable sits in Suffolk and he paints the River Stour and he paints within 5 miles of his house is pretty much his range. But Turner, he goes all over the place. As soon as he's got a chance to, he goes to Switzerland and he paints these extraordinarily dramatic views of the mountains there. I mean, there's a watercolour of the Mount Gothard Pass. And it's a vertical. The other thing that Turner was really good at was vertical landscapes, right? So you get that sort of dizzying sense of being high up above things. The Constable's always flat. It's always horizontal, always stretching sideways. But Turner could do another kind of landscape drama. That's how inventive he was. And that view of the Mount Gothard Pass, it is honestly, like standing on the edge of a precipice and staring down into a bottomless pit. It's such a wonderful image. So he goes to Switzerland, he goes all over the place, and his breadth, or the fact that he's also doing these rather adventurous mythological scenes and scenes based on Greek mythology, Roman mythology, his range is so much more exciting. You've got an artist that's tackling more subjects, whereas poor old Constable sitting there in Suffolk painting the same old stretch of the river over and over and over again. If you're a kind of masochist and you like this idea of art that doesn't go anywhere and that just takes a tiny step at a time and eventually gets there, then I can see there's something in Constable's process that would appeal to you. But if you believe that art should have a big open heart and to just aim higher and bigger and be greater, then even the early work of Turner, which isn't necessarily always his best work, even that to me rings a kind of successful bell. That's how I feel about it, Bendy.
Yeah, no, you're the perfect person for our ADHD age world. You like, to be hit between the eyes by different kinds of art very rapidly as you scroll through your art historical Instagram. And, Turner certainly does that for you. And I would definitely concede that Turner has probably the broader and greater range. But I just think there's something to celebrate in Constable sticking with it. Proudly being a rather sometimes xenophobic little Englishman and thinking, well, this is my patch and I'm going to become the world's best person at painting it in a totally different way. I think you just have to give Constable time and he delivers something. And I'm going to trump you, Wild. I must apologize, listeners. I really didn't want to get too pugilistic in this in this comparison to the great artist as we slug it out. But I just want to, my trump card, I think, is going to be a quote from Lucian Freud, who I think you're going to find a knockout blow. He says, Constable is so much more moving than Turner because you feel for him it's truth-telling about the land. And I think that's pretty good, don't you? Because Constable does tell you the truth. And the fact is, just because it takes him a long time to find that truth doesn't make it any less powerful.
Well, of course, Freud is a great judge of art and a great painter in himself, in his own right. And I remember an exhibition at the National Gallery that Freud was involved with, where he picked, is it Constable's oak tree? I can't remember the exact title of the picture, but it's basically a close-up of a tree. So all you've got in the picture is a single tree. It's not in the show, actually, but it is one of Constable's most powerful evocations of a tree, I think. And I can see why I liked it. It had a drama to it, this single gnarled tree, painted kind of perfectly, every bit of bark observed. I can see why Lucian Freud liked that. I liked it as well. But that is actually a different example from most of the constables in this exhibition, most of which are pretty busy. And there isn't one tree, there's loads of them. And there's that big face-off, which is kind of the centre of the exhibition, isn't it? Because amongst Constable's weaknesses was what I have to describe as a kind of pettiness, really. I mean, he really managed somehow to let Turner get under his skin. He didn't like the fact that Turner had been successful before him. He made various snide comments about Turner. And when he did eventually make it into the Royal Academy and he selected, he became part of the hanging jury there, the head of the hanging jury, he created this mano a mano. I mean, you say you don't like it when you go against me pugilistically. Well, poor old Turner was forced into a pugilistic role by the so-called mild-mannered Constable, who actually turned out to be a bit of a minor groveller, really. Constable hung his picture in a fantastically prominent position at the same time as picture of Salisbury Cathedral, as he put a Turner that he hung in a lesser position. So he deliberately set up a thing that made him look better than Turner, didn't he?
Well, okay. In that one instance, that picture of Salisbury Cathedral, which is in the show and looks very well, he considered that his preeminent painting. So I think on that one occasion we can let him have star billing in the Royal Academy, don't you think? But also, you mentioned about Constable being sniffy about Turner. Do you know who had actually voted against Constable being elected a full Royal Academician and had encouraged other people to vote against Constable? Well, Turner. So I think we can allow poor old JC to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. What do you think?
Well, that's true, yeah. And in fact, one of my favourite quotes in the show is, I'm afraid, a rather disparaging quote by Turner about Constable, because later on when Constable took up an extraordinary ambition he had to sort of splatter lots of white all over the picture, this weird thing where he'd put white highlights in, and Turner dismissed it. He said it looked like splashings from a whitewashed ceiling. As if somebody's cleaning the ceiling, painting the ceiling white, and it splashed down onto the pictures, which I think is a good put down. I mean, even at put downs, he was better than Constable, wasn't he?
Yeah, we've all had those decorators in who've painted the ceiling and not put the right dust blanket down on the floor or the wall, and you see the sort of white splats, don't you?
Yeah.
I have to concede, actually, those are the Constables I don't like. That strange moment, and I think the painting where he had his least success with this technique is the one of Waterloo Bridge. That moment later in his career where he decides to put too many white dots on. I'm not quite sure what he was getting at, but in the exhibition they make that rather a moment where Turner is triumphant, don't they? Because they show that clip from the great film Mr. Turner, in which Timothy Spall plays Turner, where you see James Fleet as a rather sort of fussy and pedantic John Constable, trying desperately hard to get that painting of London Bridge right, and Turner comes in and adds his famous red boy to one of his maritime pictures and completely wipes the floor with him.
Yeah, I mean, they are awful, aren't they, those late Constables? It's such a strange manner, this thing of adding all the white to it. But I don't think, I'm glad to hear you be honest about it and say that you found the late work a bit troubling, because I did too. I thought in that comparison, Turner's late, I mean, they're both crazy by the end, weren't they? Both are mad as a tin of beans, I think. But Turner's madness was somehow more fruitful than Constable's madness. But yeah, that was annoying, that that sprinkling of white snow, as others called it, on everything. But just going back to the Salisbury picture, right? The other thing I have about Constable, before he gets into this bad white sprinkling phase, the Salisbury painting with the rainbow, there's a sense in him of wanting to put something into every corner of the picture. It's very different from the sketches, right? The sketches, for example, there's all those sequences he did where he was trying to get good at painting clouds. So he paints clouds over and over and over again. And it's something that people have come to admire. Constable's long-winded effort to be able to paint clouds perfectly. Someone had criticised him for it in a previous picture, said he couldn't paint clouds. So off he goes painting clouds over and over and over and over and over again. And some people are impressed by that. They think, this is an artist really getting down to his job and doing it really thoroughly. I just thought, well, he just wasn't very good at painting clouds, so it took him a long time to learn to do it. So I was a little bit more dismissive of that than some can be. But the one thing I noticed about his pictures is that in this show, there's very little weather in them. And by that I mean the sort of shift of weather. That weather has this ability to be sunny one minute and somehow cold the next, and rainy and then snow. And that willfulness of the English climate, you just don't get enough of it in him. I mean, all those pictures of the River Stour, they're all sort of bathed in an equal summery light. And it's the same sort of daytime in the same sort of clouds, really, and the same sort of vaguely pastoral mood. And there's actually very little range in terms of real landscape feeling about the climate and the weather in them. For a landscape painter, I think that's a bit of a shortcoming. But also, he always fills the corner with something. You say he didn't paint like Claude. Well, no, but like Claude, you feel there's a management of the image going on. So there's always like a little dog in this corner, there's the end of a boat in this one, you put a rainbow in the sky if there's a gap between the clouds, and there's a building of the image, which, considering he's so famous for painting outdoors all the time, when he gets back into the studio, there's a building of the image of bits that feels almost like the construction of a jigsaw puzzle. Make sure that every section's got something interesting in it. And what it adds up to is a kind of image that belongs on a biscuit tin, really, more happily than anything that Turner ever did. I mean, you can't imagine Turner in his great watercolour phase ever supplying the correct imagery for a tin of biscuits. You can certainly do it with Constable, can't you?
For old Constable, he's always called biscuit tinny or chocolate box. Biscuit tins and chocolate box didn't invent with pictures on when he was painting things. So I think that's a retrospective.
But you know what it is? Sorry to interject again. Sorry, you know what that is? It's because, did you ever buy those biscuit tins where there's a sort of repousse effect on the top, where they've been sort of pressed in from underneath, so they're slightly bubbly. So it's like a Christmas view or something, and the little snowman is slightly raised up. You know what I mean? The bubbly.
I'm not as much of a biscuit connoisseur as you are, but I'll take your word.
I'm sure. Look, every time I go to Scotland, all I see is Scottish shortcake being sold in tins that have a repousse top, where you can sort of feel the undulations around the shortbread. But anyway, Constable's pictures have that feel. They have that feel because of the way the thick paint is put on in places, and particularly once it gets into the white dot phase. They have that repousse feel, as if someone's pushed out bits of them from behind. And again, it adds to this atmosphere, I think, of a constructed landscape that is pretending to be a real one, but doesn't actually feel like it, because the climate, the actual sense of weather, has been reduced to a kind of formula. Sorry, I interjected to say that, but the biscuit tin problem is one I felt with some of his best images.
Yeah, I think you just need to give his pictures time. I think you need to have some patience with Constable. This is very subjective, but I always think that the great test of a landscape painting is whether I can hear it. With a Monet, I hear water. With a Constable, I hear wind. And I hear the weather, which I never do with Turner. I'm not saying that maybe Turner wasn't trying to allow me to hear it, but I just think that Constable does let you get into the landscape and get involved in it to such an extent that all your senses become alive to it. Now, you raise, I think, an interesting point about Constable's busyness in his finished pictures. And people going around the show, one of the nice things about the creation of the show is that occasionally you can see the sketch for a picture beside the finished painting. And you will notice, as you say, the addition of various little features. Constable called this eye salve, so there might be someone taking a little drink from a stream, or a rainbow appears, or so on and so forth. Now, this is because Constable wanted his pictures to be not only scientific, that is, in the sense of actually representing the truth of the nature and the landscape, but also, as he said, they must also have a moral feeling. And the moral feeling is the bit that he adds late into the stage of it. And for a lot of viewers today, that feels uncomfortable. it feels a little bit overly sentimental, and I think that's where you get your biscuit tin feeling from. And the painting that you mentioned as demonstrating this for you in the show, the painting of Salisbury Cathedral, which is surrounded by a rainbow and there are clouds swirling around it, that is the picture that for him I think is delivered his most kind of moral feeling of the world. And for what it's worth, I think it's also the picture that is most misunderstood in Constable's oeuvre, and it is also misunderstood in the exhibition. They say that in the show that Salisbury Cathedral is under a cloud, and that this represents Constable's view of the politics of the time, because it's alleged that Constable was a kind of reactionary Tory. In fact, the cathedral is emerging from the clouds, and the rainbow is there because the shaft of light is suddenly emerging from the sun and illuminating the scene. And we know exactly what Constable was trying to tell us in this painting, because when he first exhibited it, he actually pinned a little bit of a poem on the wall beside the picture. And the poem was one of The Seasons by an 18th century Scottish poet called James Thomson. And well, if you don't mind, I'm going to read you the lines that Constable pinned next to the picture. Do you mind?
In a Scottish accent or not?
No, in my best privileged John Constable accent. Anyway, here's the poem. As from the face of heaven the scattered clouds tumultuous rove, the interminable sky sublimer swells, and o'er the world expands a purer azure. So Thomson, the poet, is describing that moment when suddenly the rainstorm breaks, the summer storm breaks and the sun comes through and everything seems bluer and brighter and more magnificent. And the reason that picture has things like the rainbow and the eye salve and the dramatic weather is because Constable is trying to get us to that moment, to feel that moment of what was called sublimity, right? And sublimity was a fashionable kind of literary and artistic conceit of the age. And it was that moment of something beautiful, but also dramatic and slightly unsettling at the same time. So the passing of a dramatic storm is a sort of sublime moment. And I'm going to end now with what I think is what Constable is really trying to get at in these paintings. And the reason he studies landscape so much is because he feels deeply moved, as James Thomson the poet was, that the landscape and the climate and the weather were all markers of basically the divine, of God's creation. The reason Constable wants to spend so long admiring the landscape and studying it and not leaving and putting his travelling boots on like Turner did and going to seek somewhere new all the time is because he thought that the landscape was a kind of reflection of God's brilliance, basically. We've lost touch of that in our modern secular age. And so the painting that I think I want to encourage you to go back to, Weld, and spend more time with, is actually trying to tell us something far deeper than just a picture of the landscape.
I'm going to do that. I'll go and look at it again, but this time I want you next to me. But I'll tell you why. Because it took you saying all that, and indeed the poem, which is on a different order from the picture, to convey or that meaning that you're after there. The actual painting, the trouble is, the actual painting doesn't really do it, Bendy. It hasn't got that. I hear exactly what you're saying. You're talking about a divine atmosphere, a sense of bigger truth to the landscape. But what Constable cannot summon is that sense of the sublime, the dramatic, the amazing. Some things that Turner does just instinctively. When you look at a Turner watercolour of the sun, it already has a sense of divinity, an amazing, powerful sense of radiance, and isn't God's world amazing? It just has it instinctively. Constable has to get a poet to quote next to it to give that feeling, and then he'll wheel you in to expand on that a bit later for those kinds of meanings to be evident in the picture itself. And that, for me, is actually a shortcoming. Art is at its best when it says really important things in ways that are not only immediately or rather powerfully evident, but also in ways that are somehow, I don't know, they're a collection of things that has been made a bit simpler, So they're a way of saying complicated things with a more immediate image. I mean, it's the power of the eye, isn't it? You don't need to spell out this, this, and this, and this, because the picture goes straight to the jugular and says it immediately, as it does with some of Turner's watercolours. So you just don't get that with Constable. You can sit there for a long time and enjoy the way he paints his trees and things. But that sublime message, which I've always felt is missing from him, and that you've just delivered to me, that comes from you very effectively, but it doesn't come from the pictures, I think. And what's really interesting in the show, actually, if you're going to pin me to the wall and ask me again, what's really interesting is that I think most of the exhibition, Constable is kind of copying Turner. Well, not copying Turner, but he's trying to move in step with Turner. So there's that bit where he starts painting bigger pictures, right? His big 6-footers, the famous 6-footers. Why? Because he wants to compete at the Royal Academy in the way that Turner competes. Turner competes with the big pictures. And then his style becomes more and more adventurous. I mean, ending up on those white dots, which you don't like and I didn't particularly like. Why? Because Turner is always so adventurous. And you just feel like he's a slightly smaller artist who's gazing over his shoulder, watching Turner in action, and tries throughout the length of the exhibition to somehow respond to Turner in ways that are a match for him, but never quite get there. That was my overall sense of the whole show. That in fact, a lot of this exhibition is about Constable trying to match Turner.
Okay, interesting. I'll tell you what my takeaway from the show was. Is there's always been this kind of question mark as to at what point and why late Turner emerges. So we tend to think of Turner now as the Fighting Temeraire and all those amazing, wonderful late works, which, as you say, they do what they do. Turner's great gift, and the reason I think we can call him one of the inventors of modern art, is that he's prepared to leave much more up to your imagination. And that is his absolutely extraordinary achievement. But actually, I thought going around the exhibition is that,
and it's something that Constable doesn't do, right? He doesn't leave much to the imagination. He's a man of details.
Well, I think oddly enough, in his sketches, I think he does leave much to your imagination, but he had less confidence in his audience ultimately for the finished pictures, and that's why you get the details. But anyway, my point is that maybe we've lost sight of the fact that one of the reasons late Turner emerges, one of the reasons he feels confident enough to bin all those sort of Claudian pastiches, was actually that coincides with the moment when people start to pay attention to Constable more in those Royal Academy shows. And I think the clever, if perhaps unconscious framing of the exhibition as these two artists as rivals, and in such great depth with so many rooms full of so many brilliant pictures, is it helps us for the first time to get a sense of how both artists saw each other. And you're right that they responded to each other. I think we've perhaps misunderstood the extent to which Turner responds to Constable. But nonetheless, I think that is what makes it such an effective exhibition.
Well, I agree with you there. We won't agree about who is the most effective of the two artists. I doubt we'll go to our graves arguing about that. I'll always be a Turner man, and you'll always be a Constable man. But
can I leave you, Wild? Can I leave listeners, Wild, and leave you with a quote which I think gets us to a score draw, I hope, on this. It's a quote from Frank Auerbach, great artist himself. He said, "There isn't a Turner that somehow doesn't fly, and there isn't a Constable that doesn't burrow." What do you think of that as a summary for both artists?
I think flying is better than burrowing. Flying is a dream we all want. Burrowing, you're welcome to burrow in the hole like any old mole that you want, Bendor.
Like a hobbit.
For me, I am more like your friend the golden eagle. I want to soar, I want to fly, and Turner helps me do that. But burrow away, enjoy it while you're there. You'll soon be burrowing forever when the earth folds over you and we all say goodbye to this mortal coil. So burrow away. But no, it's a great show. It's a great show, and I've enjoyed talking to you about it because you've illuminated, as always, some of the things that were problematic for me. But I'm sorry. You might want to call it a score draw, but in my heart, I can't concede. I really can't. For me, Turner is the greater artist. Full stop. Final answer.
Okay, well, we say to listeners, as we bid them farewell, encourage them to please go to the show, get the catalogue, have a look online, and let us know what you think.
and let us know what you think. Yes, tell Bendy how wrong he is. No, go to the show if you can. All you foreign visitors, you 8 people in Ohio, you my new friend in El Paso, come to London. It's a safe and beautiful city. It's full of art. And this show really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see 2 admittedly great artists, great landscape artists, working away at each other's work. So do come. And if you can't come, well, you can listen to this podcast and watch it, of course, on YouTube, where we have lots and lots of pictures of the things we've been discussing. That's all going up on the ZCZ channel on YouTube. And on that optimistic note, to all our international listeners and visitors and viewers, thank you for listening and visiting and viewing, and it's a goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. See you next week.
Waldy and Bendy.